Okay, so, oh, dude, why's my head shifts? Come on, work with me here. Hmm. um, okay, okay. So I just need to go to join. How do I start recording? Okay, holy moly. Okay, so, yeah, this should work. And then start recording. Okay, well, and then I guess I don't need my right hand. I guess I'm using it for this. Ah, I'm wrong. Okay, can I hold both of these? Oh, I kind of can. Okay, okay. So, what am I supposed to be looking at? Okay, so that's the little camera thing. And I can go here. Here's where I can stand, and the board goes to here. No, it goes a little past. It's right there. Okay, I can remember this. Yeah, this is gonna be disorienting. Okay, so yeah. Where? Oh my gosh, that thing has such a wide FOV. Okay, hello. My name is Josh, and um, welcome to the second AI Society workshop on large language models. So my name, yeah, my name's Josh. Whatever. I'm a sophomore. I'm one of the officers here at the club. Basically, we're going to be covering everything that I could think of about large language models within an hour and a half, 2 hours, something like that. So, yeah, large language models, LLMs. When you think about this, it's ChatGPT. It's a bunch of numbers. If you have some previous experience working with neural networks or AI, you're like, okay, there's a lot of math here. And for those who have no experience at all, it's just some weird concept that exists. It's just there and it does a lot of really magical things and it's able to answer all your questions and it's super smart. What's happening in this lecture is I'll be trying to reaffirm your correct ideas, maybe push you in the right direction if you have some wrong ones, clarify certain concepts, and make things a little easier to digest. First, we'll be covering the entire architecture of GPT-3. So this covers the math, this covers how things work intuitively, hopefully intuitively. I've spent a long time on that, but there will be math too for those who care to follow about the logic. I'll also be explaining the concept of training, a little bit of math about that, just training, like how do we improve models' performance, the different types of training, what pre-training looks like, all that kind of stuff. And last is cool stuff. So this is things that I just kind of find interesting, I guess, just like my research, little things that I found out over time, me and my buddies have talked about. So that's the third subject. But yeah, hopefully most of this is intuitive. If it's not intuitive, I'll try to explain it in a way that is. And lastly, there will be math, but whatever. Yeah. So since this is a beginner-friendly workshop, I have to provide this information in. Uh, I basically I'm gonna have to explain a few foundation concepts. So the foundation concepts that I will be covering. What, am I looking wide? Do I look wide? Is that the FOV? What is that? Oh, does that mean I'll have to redo this? Okay. Does that look weird? It kind of does. Okay, I'm just gonna move the camera settings a little bit. Oh, it's worth a shot. Um, we'll do. That's what the issue was. The FOV was a little too high. And handheld. Mm, okay, this isn't bad. This is much more tolerable. Okay, well, I guess I'll have to edit the recording. And that's fine. I love updating recordings. Okay, so how does this look now? Yeah, that's not bad. Makes me look really short though. Yeah, this works fine. Okay, let's retry that. Okay, oh, I need to go back to the slides and like this. Okay, so attempt number two. Okay, um, okay. Hello everyone, and welcome to the second workshop in the AI Society workshop series. The first was natural language processing. Now we're on to large language models, and next will be something about vision language action models. My name is Joshua Tom, and I will be presenting on everything that I can reasonably cover in about an hour and a half, 2 hours. This is a completely beginner friendly workshop, so you don't have to stress about knowing things beforehand. Of course, it does help to know a little before, so maybe looking at the natural language processing lecture might help a little bit, but you don't need it because I will be covering the foundations. But let's just get into the subject itself. So, large language models, LLMs, most people think of ChatGPT. I think of it, anybody who's used AI in the past, uh, in the past, like any time knows about ChatGPT. This is the large language model that we know and love. Then for people who know a little more about AI, some people think about math. If they don't think about math and they don't know what ChatGPT is and they don't know neural nets, sometimes it's just this great, like mysterious thing that isn't really easy to understand. So the goal is to make it so that those who had correct intuitions, I'm going to reaffirm those who had some doubts, I'll help fix that up. And those who had no idea what's happening, the goal is to give you an intuitive understanding in what's actually happening here. So we'll be covering a few things. The first is the GPT-3 architecture, which was the foundation of all large language models, arguably. I mean, it's pretty solid. I'll be covering the math and I'll be covering it intuitively. So yeah, just keep that in mind. We'll be covering GPT-3 and then I'll be covering training. So what training means is how these models actually learn. How do they become so smart? So that's what I'll be doing there. And last is I'll be covering like cool stuff. So like my research here at the ASU College, research things that I've talked about with my friends that we found are cool, little things that have popped up that are like, whoa, what? I didn't know AI could do that. All that kind of stuff. That's the third subject. But most importantly, everything should be intuitive or to some degree it should be intuitive. And if it's not intuitive, I'll try to explain it in a different way where hopefully something clicks. I'll also be providing resources. If all of this goes over your head, which is totally fine, there are so many resources out there that can hopefully give you a better glimpse into everything. So after I've explained things in an intuitive way, for those who care about logic, we will be going into the mathematics of it all. So I do need to go over a few fundamentals since this is beginner friendly. So I'll be covering four of them. I can't make a four with this game, but whatever. So I'll be covering four fundamentals. And what these fundamentals are is they are things that will occur throughout the entirety of language AI related things. Language, specifically large language models, but you'll see it occurring basically everywhere. So yeah, I'm just got to get these out of the way so that you're not like, what? How does that even work like later on, like when we're like half an hour in? So anyways, first and foremost, the concept of word embeddings. You might have heard of them before. These are what you can consider vector representations of words. And the reason we have vector representations, the reason we can't just use words straight up, is because computers don't really understand that. They don't understand me just shouting at a computer. So we have to translate that into numbers. And here's a little example. So if I have three traits, so first is red, fruit, and sphere, where all of these traits can have a value between 0 and 1. You can think of that as toggling them on and toggling them off. Where when it's on, that means it is definitely red, and when it's off, that means it is not red. So using this idea, if I were to have something that is red, it is fruit, and it is a sphere, maybe I'll come up with the concept of an apple. And then if I were to turn that into a string of numbers, because those are the three traits, red, fruit, sphere, 1, 1, 1, we have a vector for the word apple. If I were to remove the color red and but keep fruit and keep sphere, we get orange. And maybe if I keep the color red, but I don't have fruit or sphere, something like a fire hydrant. I don't know. But most importantly, the one thing that you should get out of word embeddings is that we've taken traits, created a string of numbers, and that allows us to have vector representation of words, where each vector, each point, represents a different type of word because of their own unique traits. So that's something to keep in mind here is that vectors typically have way more embeddings, but in this case, I'll be using 3 dimensions because 3 dimensions is easier to visualize with this graph, and it's just three traits on and on, whatever. But what that means in this context is I will have a dimension space or an embedding space or a vector dimension, whatever, all those combinations. If you hear anything related to like dimensions and embeddings, that just means the number of traits. So in this case, it's three. Typically, we do describe words with more than three traits. So it could be like 30, it could be 12,000. But it's it's kind of hard to visualize a 12,000 dimension graph, so that's why it's three. But anyways, that's all you need to know about word embeddings. The step after word embeddings, the question is, how exactly do we get these values for words? Like, where do they come from? And where they come from is from matrices that have values already in them. So if you hear me say something like, multiplying one matrix by this other matrix yields something ridiculous. It could be like, now this word understands what time is. And you're like, how? How did it do that? And the way that happens is that second matrix is full of something called parameters. And these parameters you can think of as little knobs or dials in a machine that guide us to the answer. So if I have these two matrices, so our input one and then our trained one full of parameters, um, basically it should yield a result where by tuning the dials in that red matrix over and over and over again, just little ons and offs, when we input, when we provide our input, we should have a controlled and understandable output. So you can, I guess another example is we have the word, like we have an input, and you can think of each of these parameters as slight directions telling us where to go. So if I give it like a bar of gold, it will explore and go to the island where gold belongs. And if I give it silver, it'll go to a different island where silver belongs. But the only way it knows how to get there is by training. So these are all pre-trained. We are working with a large language model that has all of its information, all of its understanding already implanted in its head. And then we get whatever output we want. But that's all parameters are. And it's just basic, just matrix multiplication. But how does multiplication, matrix multiplication, do anything? This was something that I got kind of stuck on for a little bit because, like, how does that even help anything for an AI? So, if I have something like this, matrix one, word matrix one, or whatever, and we're multiplying all of these values, what happens here, the reason this even does anything, is because when you're multiplying two vectors together, what you get is basically the two vectors are asking each other like, hey, how do we relate to one another? How do we even like how do we relate? Like how similar are we? So if I were to take the two vectors for like cup and mug, you and I know intuitively that these two words are relatively similar. Like it's a cup and it's a mug. So when you do this matrix multiplication between these two vectors, you'll get like a pretty high value if they're similar. So if it's a similar, since these two vectors are similar, they'll have a higher output when you do the matrix multiplication. But if we have words like tree and computer, two very different things, they're both objects, sure. So there's a little similarity, but in terms of actual detail and like how exact and similar they are, they're very different. So when we do the matrix multiplication between these two, we'll have a lower score. If this doesn't come intuitively, like what the hell? All you need to understand is that multiplying two matrices together basically tells us how correct, how like good are these two vectors together? Like how similar are they? So then when we're actually training things, what happens is we're like, okay, these are not similar at all. We should keep them as far apart as we can get. So for like that tree and computer example, maybe we want that number even lower. We want those vectors even further apart. So we'll modify that output number, say now we want it to be negative 0.8. And then we'll tweak the values of tree, tweak the values of computer, and now they'll be further apart. That's how all this is just take that output value and then modify things accordingly to what we want. That's full matrix multiplication is. Now, what happens when matrix multiplication arises is we can get massive, massive values. It doesn't always have to be a bunch of multiplications where things stay between zero and and then like reach one at the highest point. It's always it can go from zero to like a million in this example, like 10 million. And is this an issue? Not necessarily, but when you have functions like this, which is called softmaxing, I'll explain all that later. As you can see, it's e to the x. It's e to a specific value in our matrix. E to the million is going to be a massive number. So it's not good to have. So what we have to do is scale things down. And this is a process called layer normalization. There is other forms of normalization just out in the world for different types of AI, but in this case, for specifically the GPT-3 architecture, we will use something called layer normalization, where we take that first layer, that original multi-million whatever, and I'll just add little indexes here just to explain like which part is which. Basically, all you need to know, all you need to care about is we take a layer, run it through this formula here, and we get some means and variance, blah, blah, blah. E is just so we never divide by zero. And then we get a kind of rescaled layer where now these values are really small. They're really, really small, but they still reflect that 1 million is bigger than 900,000, is bigger than 800,000. All of those values are scaled respectively. So now we have the same representation of our layer, but just smaller, just more scaled down. That's the last of the foundation that you need to care about. Just the concept of basically word embeddings, so represent words as vectors, parameters, which are just tuned knobs and dials so that we get what we want, and this is how we're doing all this magic in the first place. Matrix multiplication, how doing the matrix multiplication between two vectors actually yields anything of use. The closer they are, the higher their output. And then last, normalization, because matrix multiplication can explode, and we need to keep those values down. That's all the foundation that you really need to know. I'll explain everything as we go on. But yeah, I know it's a lot, but yeah, no, this is very important to understand, but not in detail, just conceptually. Okay, so don't worry. So now let's get on with it. On to GPT. This is the actual architecture of ChatGPT 3. We're currently on like 5 very different architectures, completely different architectures. GPT-4 compared to GPT-3, almost entirely different architectures as well. Same concepts, but still very different. So what happens here is um, I split the architecture into about 3 separate parts. The first is the text processing part, where we take our words and our sentences and we translate those sentences into something the computer can understand, something the model can understand. Then comes the actual transformer blocks. So that's like the main part of all of generation. Like it's in the name GPT, generative pre-trained transformer. That's the transformer. That's the huge part. And then we just have output. So just how do we translate all the machine's thoughts? Because what's happening in the transformer area is the model is going like, hey, how do these words relate to each other? It's like thinking, 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 thinking. And we need to translate those thoughts by the end of it all, translate those thoughts into an output word. Like, what is the next best word? So, breaking those down a little further, the text processing can be broken down into tokenization, embedding, and then position encoding, and then blah, blah, blah. We get to more normalization, already explained that. The concept of attention and feed forward networks, and then last, the output head and like softmax and sampling. But also, that's basically all that really matters here, is we have a bunch of different concepts that I'll be breaking down. We're going to start with the text processing part. Should be pretty quick. But yeah, normally I'd ask if there's questions, but I'm the only one here. So I'm just going to go to the next part. If I failed to explain something, maybe just put a comment. I don't even know how this thing is getting posted. But anyway, so, oh yeah, yeah, a couple clarifications. Sorry, this is like an environment I'm not used to presenting in. I can't even see the slides. So I'm just going off of like what little I can remember. But and like what I can see out of the corner of my eye. So what's actually happening with Transformers, like this is really what's happening, but in more specific detail, the Transformer thing happens about 100 more times, specifically 96 more times. And normalization occurs in a bunch of different spots. But otherwise, this is literally the GPT-3 architecture. This is what's happening. So now we get to text processing. If we have, so this is the first section again. If we have something like a sentence, the apple was falling from the tree. That's our sentence. That's what we want to feed the model and see how it understands it and then outputs the next word. What happens is within GPT-3 is there's something called a dictionary. It's dictionary where it has a list of all of the words it knows. And interestingly, it's not necessarily just specific word. Like we have a large dictionary. There's a lot of words out in the English dictionary. This includes commas, semicolons, punctuations, empty spaces, spaces in general. Um, and depending on where you're working, it could technically be split into something like running, where you split between run and ing, and that indicates like super like present tense or whatever if you add ing to something, like he's currently doing something. Anyways, um, all you need to know is that there's a dictionary and there's a bunch of words at specific indexes, and we're going to be using that. So we take our sentence, the apple was, and we break it down into something called one hot embeddings. Whereas you can see for the word the, um, it matches the one at the matches the index for our dictionary. So all this is a single vector of zeros, and then there's a one exactly where that specific word is. So the will have a one where the is in the dictionary. Um, Apple has a one where apple appears in the dictionary, so on and so forth. So now we just have a bunch of vectors. Now we have a 2D matrix of our sentence, but it's only ones and zeros right now. And then we run it through something called the embedding matrix. And this is where our words actually get meaning. So these are the predefined outputs, the already trained magic matrix that I mentioned before. Anything in red is pre-trained. And basically, we multiply the two and we get a sentence that has been broken down into vectors. And now we have our original word sentence order. So the apple was falling, or like whatever, so on and so forth. But now it includes their embedded meaning, meaning it has all of the traits that describe the word the, all of the traits that describe the word apple, yeah. So it is a translated sentence now. All of our words have been given meaning. Mathematically speaking, we just have I'm just giving it a larger one hot, and that is an E. So that's an E. So E means the I guess the matrix of one hots, the one hot embeddings. Then we multiply it by our embedding matrix, so the definitions, which is represented by W. And when we multiply these two, what we get is our new matrix of X, where the amount of rows is the sequence, so our actual sentence. So the apple was falling, that is the rows, and then the columns are the traits. So like you can kind of see how the has all of those traits after it. That's the specific definition for the word the there. So whenever I say X, whenever you see the letter X in matrix format, that means our input embedding. That means our translated sentence into AI. So that's all you really need to know is whenever X pops up again, that's our original sentence. So how exactly is an LLM going to understand our words more than just the base meaning of things? And what I mean by that is if I have something like, if we have the word apple, there's a lot of variations of the word apple. We can have moldy apple, we can have a green apple, we can have the company apple. All of these are very different words. So, how can we get the model, the LLM, to understand how green modifies the meaning of apple? So, this is where attention comes in. This is a concept that is fundamental to the entirety of LLMs, of transformers nowadays. And it's a very good paper. Not everyone likes to read papers, but it's a good one, and it really breaks down how attention works. And yeah, so it's worth a read if you have the time. But yeah, basically, it turned our word generation field from a bunch of like brute force neural networks into parallel parallel matrix, like parallel architecture, meaning we can do multiple things at once. We can get tons of detail. We can do it quickly, and we can kind of allow words to actually talk with one another rather than just changing a summary and like going off of statistics and whatever. Anyways, so we're going to have to add attention after we've translated our sentence. So what this looks like, unfortunately, attention works with batches. And what that means is it's not necessarily like all of the words have a predefined order. It just kind of throws all the words up in the air and it doesn't really care about the order. All of the words are the same in the eyes of attention, which is an issue because if we have a sentence like uh, the dog bites the man, if there's no position, like if there's no understanding of what word goes where, it could interpret it as the man bites the dog. Very different meaning. Or it could be uh, like bites the man dog. It could be something completely out there. And if we have a sentence like the dog bit the dog, intuitively you and I know that there's two different dogs in this sentence. But since there's no meaning of location and position for attention, those dogs have the exact same embeddings, exact same meanings, so the attention isn't really going to understand that. So the way we fix this is it's really easy, kind of comically easy, is we just add values that say, hey, yeah, I'm position one, I'm position two. We just add those to our original word definitions. So in terms of our traits, so if I have the red round fruit thing, I just add a couple of very specific values to red, round, and fruit that differentiate that word based on how close it is to the beginning or how is it in the middle, is it in the end? That's all that's happening. So mathematically speaking, it's just adding two matrices together. So now we have our position encoded matrix. So yeah, we're ready for attention now. Um, we just did the full text processing part. That was it. We're done with text processing. We're ready for the model to start learning and understanding what's happening. So I already explained normalization, and attention is actually a little more complex than just a section I can just have on its own here. So I'm gonna have to break that down a little more. So going towards attention, the goal for the next 4 slides, 5 slides, I just want you to understand intuitively, like understand like the concept of how these words are communicating with one another. Like literally communicating with one another. Like the apple's supposed to be green, and then it updates itself so that it understands the concept of green. Self-attention can be broken down into a few more parts. Getting the key query value matrices, allowing them to basically ask the questions and then getting an answer, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about that right now. So I'm mainly talking to the people who already know a little bit about this. The reason I'm not covering the math right now, this is just going to be a very intuitive look. So yeah, skip ahead if you want to look into the logic a little more. This is the general idea. So if we have the sentence, the cute dog, how does the word cute and the word the modify dog? So how do we get the concept of a cute dog now? Well, all of these words have a key, a query, and a value. A unique one to the, a unique one to cute, a unique one to dog. And there's respective encode like positions. So there's always going to be unique ones. And what a query is basically a question asking like, hey, do you modify me? And the K is like, I modify nouns, I modify verbs, or something like that. So, and then the actual value is like, how do I modify them? So you can think of it like this. Dog says, hey, any words that modify me? Cute says, yeah, I modify nouns. The says, yeah, I kind of modify nouns. I add grammar. And the value for cute is the literal concept of cuteness, not just like not just that it modifies nouns. It's the actual value of cuteness. So ugly and cute might both say I modify nouns, but their values are very different. That's all you need to know. So actually getting these key query and values, mm, you basically run them through translators. So you run a word embedding through 3 different matrices that basically extract the key query and value for that respective word. So what it looks like when we start with the embedding of Apple is that embedding basically says, I am the apple. I have all of these traits of apple. That's all you need to worry about, all you need to care about. I describe apple. So I'm a fruit. I'm round. I fall from trees. Hey. When we run it through the query matrix, what we get is something that asks the questions related to apple. Hey, any adjectives that describe me? Hey, do I interact with a verb in any way? Am I the subject of a sentence? Asking Apple related questions. So yeah, that's all you need to, that's what that's what these key query and value like extractors do. Anyways, so now that we have those key query values, now we can let the words finally talk. So dog, hey, does anyone modify my meaning? Respective responses. Now what happens is with the query, the dog asking the question, it's asking every word the question, including itself, which might seem weird. But anyways, you'll see what it does make sense later on, where it's like basically just saying like, hey, um, yeah, I'm a dog, I'm a noun. I don't really modify dog, but I am dog, so I relate at least a little bit. So what you can think of is when dog is saying, hey, who modifies me? The word the kind of modifies dog, right? Like it's grammar related, but it's not an adjective, which greatly modifies dog. So we'll have a 50% match there. Like remember our vector embeddings where we take the vector for, we can say we're taking the query vector for dog, the key vector for the, doing the matrix multiplication, and they're at like a maybe like a zero point 0.3 relation to one another. But between cute and dog, oh, that's a much stronger relation. That could be like a zero point 0.9. But yeah, that's how these questions are being asked, just matrix multiplication. So now that the words are communicated, we can allow the values to be modified. So what that looks like is we take the value for the, which is I add grammar. We take the value for cute, I'm cute, and we take their match percentages. And in a really easy, it's really easy, but we just take the value, apply 50% because that's how much they match. We take the value for cute, apply 90% because that's how much they match. And then we take a little bit of the dog, or however much the dog relates to itself, and we just combine all those together to get dog, to get an actually cute dog. That's how attention works. Keys and queries asking each other all the words, blah, 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 values combining together, and you get an updated meaning. Now, what you might have noticed is that we have our queries going backwards. So the query for dog is asking cat in the, and then the values are moving back up. And then if we were to move to the next step, so the cute dog barked, that's only asking backwards, and then the values are flowing. So what that means, what you're not seeing, however, is something like this, where cat is asking dog, which is ahead of it. We don't speak or we don't generate sentences like already knowing the answer to the sentence. We're thinking of the context, understanding the context, and then generating the next best step. Now, what this means is it's called unidirectional attention. So we don't really look forward ever. Is there an issue with looking forward? Not really. I mean, other types of models do that. So it wouldn't be the same architecture. But think about it like this. If we do allow the word cat to look ahead, what would dog be looking at? There's nothing for dog to look at because no word occurs after it. So it's like it's just a waste of calculation when instead we can just always look back and just get context updated upwards. But yeah, um, mathematically, or kind of just a more visual look, is we take our keys or queries, so Q, we take our keys, K, and when we multiply the two of them together, we get certain values. So you can see here, oh, let me step out of the way, sorry. So you can see here that the relates to the a certain amount. But the query for the, isn't asking cute dog or barks. It's only asking itself because that's all it can see. Now, these blacked out boxes, we get these through something called masking. So I'll show you how to do that later. But what this means is we can have the word barks be able to look at all the past words. So the cute dog barks. It can check itself against all of these. And this is our something called our attention score matrix, where you can just see how well they relate. And then we just take our values. So we can say here that for dog, cute applies with a zero point 0.6 value. So we take 0.6 of cute and then combine that with dog. That's all that's here. Let me see if I can move there. Sorry, it's like hard for me to adjust myself here. Okay, so basically, we just multiply the values with their attention scores. That's all that's really happening. And then we smush all of them together, and then we get our updated embeddings. Mathematically speaking, going back to getting our key query and value, it's really easy. It's just matrix multiplication. So first we do our normalization, because it's good practice. But yeah, so we do our little normalization technique. We run it through our query matrix, our key matrix, our value matrix, and we just get um, a matrix of all of the word's values. So it's not just the keys, query, and value for the word the. It's the keys, queries, and values for the whole sentence. So what that looks like is every single row is a word, and every single afterwards, every single value in the columns adjacent to it, that's its query values, whatever. So now we do the matrix multiplication between the two. We allow the keys and queries to ask each other questions. Too far. We allow them to ask each other questions. And what this square root of d is it's basically normalization again. It's better than softmaxing though. All that matters is we're keeping things low. Um, and now you might notice here that the values for our attention scores don't really look like this because these aren't zeroed out. And that means we have to mask it. So you might think, hey, I can just zero these out, right? I can just kind of reduce the values for these to nothing. But negative 0.2, one, we're reducing it to zero, or reducing it, we're actually increasing the value. So what we'd have to do is kind of funny. We just subtract infinity from it. We drag it so far down that it has like as far negative relationship to all these other words as humanly possible. So this is what we end up with, is we end up with our embedding, our attention scores that are masked almost, because I made all this talk about normalization, like, hey, we don't want big values, and there's literally negative infinity right here. So we have to do something to fix that. And this is where we get into something called softmaxing. So this is a really cool function to me. And the reason I think it's really cool is if I have a bunch of values in a vector. So 2, 1, 0, -1, -2. And we can assume that we're interpreting 2, positive 2, as the most important and -2 as the least smallest value. So the higher the number, the better. If we're interpreting this like that, when I run it through the softmax function, which is that e to the value function, which is where we were worried about things blowing up, when I run it through this, we get a weighted average. And what a weighted average means is really cool because look at all these values. If you notice, you might notice that these are percentages. And what they do is they add up to 1. They add up to 1. So we've turned our interpretation of this vector into some percentages that keeps everything scaled properly. So if I were to use softmaxing on this value here, the negative infinity, the super low, low, small negative value, softmaxing will accommodate, like keep everything in accordance to one another. So the 0.7 is so massively large compared to negative infinities that it's going to go to 1 because it's 100% of everything. So that's what we use softmaxing for, to kind of keep things um, scaled properly. And now we've properly masked our outputs. So now the words can't cheat and look ahead when we're generating. So yeah, that's softmaxing. Yay, we did it. And now we just have to apply the values. So we've gotten our attention scores. We've figured out how the words relate to one another. They've talked and chatted. Now we just apply the values. So looks like this. We have our max score. We have our values. And then when we do the matrix multiplication, there it is, our fully updated matrix of words. Sorry. Where, um, yeah, yeah. So now this value of dog has the embedded value cute, and it understands that it's cute. So yeah, we did. Oh, geez, I thought someone was in. Oh, that scared me. Sorry. Oh man, I gotta cut that. So interestingly, what if? Oh, too close. What if we wanted to learn more? Our current sentence right now is the cute dog barks. All of our relationships have been defined through just basic grammar, to say the least. Yeah, cute describes dog because it's an adjective. Yeah, dog relates to to barks because it's a noun. Verb relationship, the relates to things grammatically. So, well, we'll fill over. What if we wanted to learn more? Like, there's obviously more connections in the sentence than just grammar. So, what if the sentence is something like this? When the door closes, the cute dog barks. Now we have a time relationship, a cause and effect relationship. When the door closes, the cute dog barks. So, how can we encode that? Well, unfortunately, we can't just ingrain every single possible key query value into just to cover all the horizons. We can't just have grammar and time and like family relationships or even like, I don't even know, like material relationships and whatever. We can't put it all into one. All of those key queries and values are specialized to ask those specific questions that we care about. So this is where we get into multi-headed self-attention. We just ask more questions. So instead of like coming up with some weird technique or we ingrain like certain question aspects into different parts of one attention key query value, we just have multiple attention. So much easier. So ignore that red. Ah, man, I meant to remove it last lecture, but I forgot to do it too. So we have our original key query and value, our original attention block. Then we can have our new one, like our temporal one. So the queries for grammar are like, how do you relate to me grammatically? Temporal one is like, how do you relate to me in terms of like sequence, cause and effect? Like, what comes after me? We can have literally anything. We can even have something like fancy, like family attention or something like that. Where it's like, hey, are you like related to me familiar? Like, I'm getting the point I'm trying to get at is that large language models can be so diverse with how many heads they have, like how much detail they can ingrain, and parameters can be tweaked and tuned to basically achieve whatever we want. We can have literally anything simply because we can turn those knobs and dials a billion trillion times. And eventually, there is a combination of dials that encodes what we want. It has the meaning that we've been looking for. So, what that looks like after we've done our multi-head self-attention is literally just splitting running our embeddings through a bunch of different attention blocks. So yeah, this is what it looks like is we just have it split. We just add them together, run it through a trained matrix called a merger, and now we just have something that understands everything, all of those different attention details. And what it looks like mathematically is pretty simple. We have attention head one, attention head two, ingrained whatever details, I don't even care. And we just add them. So that means their values are just going one after another. We multiply this into our matrix merge. And the funny thing about this matrix merging thing, oh, I just stepped on something, is that it quite literally is just picking and choosing the important values. It's just trained to do that. It's just like, okay, hey, Um, I've learned this many different subjects about the and Apple. I'm just gonna grab that one and grab that one and grab that one and just crush it all together. And now I've ingrained the property of Apple proper. Like it understands Apple in terms of a bunch of different things. That's all that's really happening. And now we have a fully contextualized thing. So it's not that complex. I always thought like, oh, multi-head self-attention, it's a lot of different concepts. No, you're just adding them together, squishing them together. Yeah, take a step back. No, I can't see the screen. Anyways, why do we need to take a step back? Well, as you saw in our original self-attention, the values for dog are disappearing. We only have 0.1%, 0. Like 10% of our original value of dog in this new embedding. So does it really embed the proper, like, does this really mean dog in the way that we think of it? Because it's missing our original values. And if we were to continue to do this, like, let's say the next time I run us through attention now, and let's say dog is again, maybe it's like 20%. With the yellow dog, it's like 20% related to itself. Now there's even less of the original value. So what we have to do is something called grounding. Oh, wait, it's called adding residuals, but I memorized it as grounding, so I'm very sorry about that. I'll be referring to it as grounding, but if you hear, oh, add residuals, it's just adding the old values, our original X, our original sentence, to our attention modified one. That's all that's happening here. And now we kind of ground everything. It's like, hey, I understand how things change. I understand how things have been modified. And now I'm just gonna make sure that those little changes are added back to what we originally had, so we don't lose track of everything. So yeah, that's our grounding residual adding process. Oh yeah. So after we've done our grounding, as you can imagine, the tokens might be a little confused. Why, you might ask? Well, we have the word dog. It knows that the relates to itself in terms of grammar. It knows that the is referring to it as a noun. It knows that it comes before it in time. It knows that Q modifies this. It knows all these different relationships with all these different words, but it doesn't know itself. It doesn't understand what it means. Like, what is dog? All it knows is how all these other values modify dog, but it doesn't know what itself is. So it's kind of all over the place. All these values all over the place that describe a bunch of different things that don't directly relate to dog. So we use something called a feed-forward network to condense all these relationships and define it back into something that's calm. And what a feed-forward network is made up of is something called it's it's a multi-layer perceptron. That's an entirely different subject. It's not a different subject, but it is a lot of talk about foundational neural networks, how neurons and biases work together. Here's what the math looks like. Does this make sense to you? If it does, that's good. This is a matrix multiplication, and then we add bias, and then we run it through something called the nonlinearity function, which is ReLU, and ReLU means rectified linear unit, and that makes things nonlinear. This whole feed forward thing, if it makes no sense to you, that is fine. There are a lot of good videos that explain it way better than I can right now. All that matters is that it condenses it into something that's more understandable and more normal. That's all that matters. So, oh yeah, and then we just ground it one more time. And if you're wondering why we're grounding it again, or residual layers, if you're wondering why we ground it again, it's because just like with multi-head self-attention, there's always a chance to just completely lose the meaning of everything because we're running our values through another matrix. The values are completely different by the end of this. Sure, it could be trained, but there's always a chance, like, hey, given this unique input, I'm just going to completely forget the word like dog. It could be just completely gone. It could be modified, and maybe it represents some furry creature, but we lost the value of dog. So yeah, now we have to ground it again. Nothing crazy. Add our original input embedding to our feed forward networked sentence And now we get our properly grounded sentence. And now that we've allowed the words to communicate and understand one another and stay grounded and understand their original meaning, once we've done all of that, we take our multi-head self-attention, we take our feed-forward network, we take our grounding 96 more times. All of those math calculations 96 more times. Why? Well, that's because, as you can see here, oh, this might be kind of hard for me to show. So, um, yeah. So as you can see here, the word barks isn't being modified it's being modified by the word dog, it's being modified by the word cute, but it's not being modified by this dog, this cute dog. So it's using the original dog value, not the contextualized one, which is an issue. So the next time I run through the matrix, now in this yellow red one, what happens is now, now barks is being modified by the cute dog. Now, it might seem excessive in our example to do this 96 times. Sure, it might help with some detail, but it's 96 times for a four-word sentence. So here's a better way to think about it. If I have something like um, The Hound of the Baskervilles, 60,000 word book, Sherlock Holmes, and instead of just the dog barks, the cute dog barks, now we have a 60,000 long matrix. And this is also where computation size gets really massive because it scales. It scales. So now we have a 60,000 long, 60,000 tall matrix. And we'll have to multiply things accordingly. So, anyways, we have our matrix. And interestingly, what you can do for a mystery novel is, let's say we have the sentence, the culprit was, the murderer was, at the end of this 60,000 word long thing. And we run it through our 96 layers of attention. What happens, what needs to happen for the model to successfully say who the murderer was is have all of the previous words attend to the words that are behind them and ask questions, and then we run it through the next layer, and those modified words ask modified questions over and over and over again, and that last word was should be able to, through all of the context, have absorbed everything in the book, all 60,000 words, every single meaning, every action that Sherlock Holmes took, every action that the murderer tried to do in secret. It understands all of it. And now, when we output things, it should properly be able to guess things. So that's why we have these 96 layers, so that things can be understood over and over and over and over again, so that by the very end of a super long context, we can have related words to our original sentence. So we can have the culprit was actually get answered. This is, I don't know, I just like this example a lot. I don't know why. Anyways, yeah, so the more loops, the more detail. That's why we do it 96 more times. So, we're almost done. We've taken our word dog 96 times. That last word barks understands everything there is across all the multiple heads of attention, across all the different attention cycles. It understands temporal, family, grammar, material, animal, I don't know, 96 times. And remember that original embedding matrix? The one that kind of defined our words from the one hots? We just flip it on its side, multiply our dogs into it, multiply the word dogs into it, or barks, sorry. Ooh, sorry, I'm getting kind of tired. Barks is multiplied into this rotated matrix, and we get our word output. That's how it happens. Um, that's legitimately how it happens. I thought it was so much more complex than that. No, you just rotate our original sentence to word. Okay, so you can think of it as when we originally started, we took single word and translated that into a long vector. Now we're taking that long vector and just translating it back. where each one of these words are now kind of asking questions, where it could be something like, "Hey, I'm the word barks. I will now ask this super, super dense embedding. Oh, well, maybe not barks. Um, hey, I'm the word. Oh, here, actually, no. I'm just going to go through the math and then I'll give you an intuitive look into it. So all we do is we take the last word. So this could be barks, that super dense one. And then we take our rotated matrix. We multiply the two of these. And then we get something called logits or logits. Everybody says it differently. And this is a kind of chance, or like this says like, hey, these are the words that are most likely to come out. Obviously, this does not look like a 0 to 100% thing. So what we can do is run it through that softmax formula that I mentioned before, and now we get an output of how these words actually relate to one another, of how these words should be output. So loudly is the highest probability after the cute dog barks. And you can think of it like this. The word loudly is asking a question, is asking a question to the word dog. It is asking a question to the word barks, sorry. And it's analyzing the word barks. And it's like, okay, hey, does this word barks involve a creature? Does it involve an alive creature? Is this capable of making noise? Is it a creature commonly known for making noise? It's asking all of these questions to this super dense embedding. And based on how many of those questions are like a super strong yes and or a not strong yes at all, it outputs their similarity. It outputs how well they relate to one another, which is that word embedding thing that I mentioned, or that matrix multiplication thing that I mentioned all the way back in the beginning. The relationship between those two words is how we get our outputs. So you can check loudly and super dense barks against each other, and if they're super similar, if they are very related, then we're going to have a much higher chance to get the word loudly output, versus quietly might be a little further apart, and once is even further apart, so on and so forth. And that's it. That's word generation. So in summary, the silly rat got poisoned. We take our original sentence, split it into our embeddings, we add our position encoding, we run it through multi-head self-attention. We run it through a bunch of different attention heads, which all have different meaning, and we combine all of those values together and get the average of them. And then we make sure to normalize it because it's all over the place, and make sure we ground it so that we know that it's related to our original sentence. We run those 96 more times so that we can get more and more detail. We flip our word embedding on the side, our embedding matrix on the side, run that super dense word through it, and we get our output through some softmax and whatever. That's it. That's an LLM generating a single token. Yay! Oh, yeah, this slide's out of order, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we did it. We have covered the entirety of a large language model's ability to generate a word, a single word. We've covered word embedding, so translating our words. We've covered how it actually gets all those thoughts together and allows the words to communicate over 96 different times. And then how we ground things back to reality. And then how we output things. That's it. Good job. You've made it through. And now, theoretically, hopefully, you understand what's going through an LLM's mind when it's generating a word. So, what's next? Well, my headset's about to die, so I need to charge it. But the next subject that we'll be covering is how do large language models learn? And we're going to cover a few different subjects. So we're on the second part now. Good job. You made it through the first part. That's the majority of the math, the majority of the painful graphs and concepts. We're done. You did. So now we're going into the training part. How did we actually get this model to be so smart? How does it actually understand temporal relationships and family relationships? Well, that's training. So, interestingly, GPT-3 was only given pre-training. So, I'll go a little bit into the basic math of that because we did focus so much on GPT-3. But then the future models that came after it, GPT 3.5, GPT 4, GPT 4.5, 5.2, 5.2 Codex, for all those different models use different training strategies like instruction fine tuning. Oh, messed that up. That's supposed to be supervised fine tuning, SFT, instruction fine tuning. Anyways, yeah, the acronym's wrong. It's supposed to be IFT. Um, is it? I'm pretty sure it is. I'm not pretty sure. Anyways, then we go to the next step after SFT, which is reinforcement learning with human feedback, so RLHF. Then we get into something called DPO, and then we go into IPO and like SPO and a bunch of different training methods. I won't be going into those mathematically because they're not relevant to GPT-3, but they are relevant to large language models in general. So just keep them in mind. Okay. Um, yeah. Let me see. What is my battery at? I might just pause the recording here. 8%. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to finish the rest of this lecture. We still got like half of it to go. I haven't even covered the fun parts yet. So, okay, that was a good half. Stop the recording. And